experiencing. Thank you all so much for your feedback as we get that taken care of. All right. So we today are thrilled to welcome Rosian Zerner for our first Summer Survivor Speaker Series of this year. Rosian has been very patient with us today as we've had to do a couple of Plan Bs. So we appreciate you as always, Rosian. Just a little bit of an introduction. My name is Annie Black. I'm the Director of Programs and Volunteers for the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. And like I mentioned, this is the first edition of our Summer Survivor Speaker Series. So today we're going to hear from Miss Rosian Zerner. You can see our lovely Rosian. Hi, Rosian. So Rosian was born in Kaunas or Kovno, Lithuania, and she is going to share her and her family's story with us today. I did want to give a quick plug, and I promise I'll be brief, that ties into Rosian's testimony today. So we have a really wonderful upcoming special exhibition at the museum that opens on June 23rd called The Book Smugglers, Partisans, Poets, and the Race to Save Jewish Treasures from the Nazis. Next week on June 22nd, we'll be having a virtual opening for that with the author of The Book Smugglers, Mr. David E. Fishman. So we hope you'll join us and come see the exhibit. We'd love to have you. So just before we begin, I'd love to thank our community partners for this series, Jewish Family Service of Greater Dallas, Legacy Senior Communities, and Refugee Services of Texas. We are so grateful for your support. We will leave plenty of time for questions at the end of today's program. So if you want to go ahead and locate your Q&A button, at any point, if you have a question, feel free to drop it in there and we'll get to as many as we can. So Rosian, I'm going to turn it to you. Caroline, if you could unmute, and I'm going to put your PowerPoint up for you. And whenever you're ready, Rosian, you can begin.
All right. This is a different setting than expected, and I'm not quite sure of the timing here, but I want to welcome you all to the Dallas Holocaust Museum of Human Rights, and thank you for your interest in my story. I'm here with you today as proof that miracles do happen. At a time when the whole world seemed like it was intent on killing Jews, there were those upstanders who did the righteous thing and became rescuers. There were too few, but the ones that were the rescuers became extraordinary instead of being ordinary people who just followed the crowd and just killed Jews wherever and whenever they could. That's the uniqueness of the Holocaust. Jews were persecuted across borders, no matter who they were and where they were. It's almost like if somebody from Rwanda would go to London and would be persecuted. It was a world changed on a dime, and really not on a dime. The signs were there for quite a while. And my story begins in Kaunas, Kovno, or Kovne, depending whether you're a Jew, Russian, or Lithuanian. And next slide, please. And this is a, not previous one. This is a picture of Lithuania on the map. You can see the red mark. It's very, very small. It's the largest of the 3 Baltic states, but it fits into Texas 10 times. So you can imagine that everybody knew each other and everybody could be the person who's going to denounce you. But even though Lithuania is so small, it actually ruled most of Europe in the 14th century, all the way to the Black Sea. And it's kind of an interesting country because it boasts the first university in Europe. It says it's a center of Europe. The language is based on Sanskrit, and it's the oldest living language spoken in the world today. It has 6,000 lakes, but some of them are really puddles, actually. And what did they do? They were the first to make vodka out of corn, and they have so many unique things. And one of the oddest ones is that it had a statue of Frank Zappa in the middle of Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania. For some of you younger ones, you may not know who he is, but that's a very odd things to do. The Lithuanians were the last to leave paganism for Christianity. And even today, women always seem to have flower names given to them at birth. And the culture became very religious. But Lithuania was also the center of Jewish learning. The Vilna Gaon is world renowned, and in Kaunas, where I was born, there were 40 synagogues, over 100 Jewish institutions and organizations. And here you see on the right a photograph of what it could have looked in the year that I was born. And on the bottom, you have a panoramic view of Kaunas. Next slide. Here I'm on the left, I'm with my mother, and I had a very happy childhood. I was born into a prosperous family, and in the middle you can see the car with a low license plate. And we had, at that time, my father had a chauffeur, and we had a gardener and a nanny and so forth. On the right of that picture with the car is my father with me. And on the last picture on the right, I am with my nanny, but I'm holding a book because I was an early learner, and I was always with a book and flowers somewhere. So I'm wearing flowers on my head, and I have a book in my hand at that point. It was a happy childhood, yes. But next slide. Here are the tanks rolling in from the Soviet occupation in 1940. The Soviets occupied Lithuania, and to this day, Lithuania is very adamant that it is the Russians who were the bad guys. They're all bad guys, but and the Germans took second place. But here I am in October 1940 on the left side in front of my grandfather's home. That's a 3-story place in apartment building, actually. And I think that was the last picture taken of me before we were herded into the ghetto. Next, please. Here you see Hitler marching into Lithuanian Klaipėda. But even before Hitler and his Nazis started the methodical killing of the Jews, there were Lithuanian collaborators. And between the declaration and the Anschluss, Lithuanians took it upon themselves to make about 150 villages Judenfrei, which means free of Jews. They were herded into synagogues and burned. They were decapitated. They were cruelly tortured, actually, and killed. And on the bottom right, you see what happened just blocks from where we lived, where there was a garage called the Lietukis Garage, and the Lithuanians, the collaborators who got 150 Jews into this garage and filled them with water hoses into their mouths and clubbed them to death if they could survive that. And you can see that there is quite a crowd viewing that. and there was nobody that stepped forward. On the left, you can see the synagogue that was before and after the war. From the 40 synagogues, only one is standing today in Kaunas. Next slide, please. So we were herded into the ghetto, which is Slobodka was a slum region that was converted into a ghetto. And even before we went there, my grandfather was murdered because they wanted his possessions and because he had an apartment building that they wanted to take over. And my grandmother, who was elderly, probably this younger than I am, but forgetful, forgot to wear the yellow star, which was required of all of us. She was standing in a bread line, and her neighbors denounced her, and she was taken away and was never seen again. And here you see some slides of the younger ones that were in the ghetto and still had to wear the yellow star. On the bottom left, you see the prisons and the friends visiting the prisoners behind the wall. You can see above a picture of two friends saying goodbye, I suppose friends, and before one is deported, and the water situation. Living in the ghetto was not easy. We had about 700 calories assigned to us, 10 feet of space at most, no running water. It was the coldest winter on record in Lithuania, and we got our water actually from the snow and had to rush home to drink it before it would melt, before it would refreeze again after melting. The Nazis ruled by fear. They would say, oh, this particular action was just one of them. Another one was just an accident. So deceit and fear were rampant. The ghetto was divided into two, a smaller one and the bigger one. We were in the bigger one. The smaller one was liquidated just weeks after it was created. And the hospital with visitors, nurses, doctors, and patients was just burned down. The ghetto we lived in was, quote, liquidated, which means everybody was either murdered or deported, was liquidated 24 weeks after it was created. But before, there were two great, what they called Aktionen, the Große Aktion and the Kinderaktion. The Große Aktion was when we were all rounded up into the square, and just like you see in the movies, go to the right, go to the left, you live, you die. That day, about 10,000 were taken to be shot at the nearby 9th Fort. We were very lucky. But my parents realized that there was no way out there except through escape, and I was the first to go because children and the elderly were disposable. They had heard stories of children having their blood sucked out for the troops at the front. They heard stories about children just being thrown onto trucks with limbs flying and total mayhem and murder for children. And so what they did is they started to dig a hole under the fence surrounding the ghetto. The ghetto had a fence and searchlights. And so they had to time the guards when they were changing their timing. And it was a very delicate operation where they put their own lives at stake. But what they did is they dug a hole under the wire, and each time they would do deeper and deeper and deeper for many, many nights. Finally, they had a hole that was large enough for me, and risked their lives again and again. And this time they pushed me through the fence where my father's secretary was waiting for me on the other side. I was 6 years old. I didn't know what was happening. She took me to her apartment and I wouldn't stop crying. So she didn't keep me, but she did give me her name, their last name, and she pretended she was my mother. I was her illegitimate daughter, and I was then transferred to my first rescuers. Next slide, please. On the left, you see my father's secretary, Bronya Budurikaite, and in the upper photo, you see the two Natashas on the left and on the right. They were journalists, and the Rivka Vitkin in the middle was a Jew who was a journalist who was being hidden by them already. Two Natashas were Christian scientists, and they were also being persecuted, but their conscience and their religion compelled them to do the right thing, and I'm eternally grateful to them. On the right, you see the color photo of Natasha after the war. On the bottom, you see Margarete and the two daughters. Margarete Holtzmann was a German who was married to a Jew in Lithuania. One of her daughters was sort of a pacifist flower child, and she would approach the German Nazis and say, "This is a wrong war, please stop it." And she was arrested and killed. So Helene decided to start saving Jews, and she wrote a book, which I'm also, that talks about how she devoted her rest of her life to save children. In the middle is her daughter Margarete, and she survived the war, and I visited her several times when she moved to Germany, because they had to leave Lithuania as Germans when the Russians came again. And she recently died, but she was also my rescuer, even though she was only 17. She never denounced me, even though her mother was putting her life at risk. On the bottom right is my main rescuer, Lida, who's totally a saint. These are all the people that she was saving at the time. I'm the one on the upper left with the grouchy face because they had just shaven my head because of lice. And the other ones are, some are Jewish, some are not Jewish. One was a deaf mute who would also have been killed. Another family with the person sitting next to her is a Russian widow with her children who have been murdered. They've been discovered. Next, please. And here I am on the left in a photo that you will see again, because it has been taken on Lida's farm where they hid a great deal. And the United Nations used this photo for their 2013 Day of Remembrance in Paris at UNESCO. It was plastered all over the walls, on the stage, and I heard even the elevators and everything like that. It shows that they chose it because it shows that one could smile even under circumstances where were so horrendous. And I think that is what kept my positive attitude. and I highly recommend it. So on the picture behind the flowers, beside the flowers, is another photo on Nida's farm. And again, the last one on the right is the house where I was hiding. I went back there after the war. I saw my rescuers. I retraced my steps. I had actually blocked out my child. And one day in 2000, I kind of woke up and said, oh, I'm making the same mistakes over and over and over again. Perhaps I should see what is causing them. And I realized there was no childhood in my life. So I tried to trace my steps and see if I can reconnect myself with my past. And that was kind of I don't know, Pandora's box. It released a lot of emotional experiences that I had to face, and it was very difficult. But I think in the long run, it helped me and it put me on a path of trying to give back. So now I'm living a life of gratitude. And one of the ways that I'm expressing it is to have my testimony shared and help others understand that horrors happen, but they don't have to. And I hope that you will get that message, because you can see that the rescuers were available to me and to many others. And there is a way for everyone to stand up to injustices, indifference to cruelty, and racial prejudices and other prejudices. You're there and you can stand for yourself and for others. In the middle, I have some flowers that I started to paint. And that was something that I continued to do. So I graduated with fine arts degree and have painted and sculpted and did pottery enameling, and now I write. So next, please. Oh, this is what the Soviets found when they came to Lithuania. You see them checking the bodies. They see them taking the bodies from a mass grave. You see the rubble that was left of when the Germans simply burnt down the entire ghetto after I escaped and my parents escaped. About 2,400 people were burned to death that were not able to escape the fires that after the Germans dynamited the ghetto. The others were deported to different camps, and very, very few survived at all. This is a very difficult slide for me, so please go on. Next. So now it's 1945. The Russians are in Lithuania, but we are hoping to emigrate. And we did so illegally. And the map on the bottom shows our path. On the upper left, I'm with my mother and my father. After the war, they both survived. And that's another miracle, because Lithuania holds one of the most abhorrent titles as being one of the countries in Lithuania, in the world, in Europe, that killed most of its populations that was Jewish. They say that 96% of Jews were killed. That's 10% of the Lithuanian population. We're looking at one of the 4%ers here. The figures vary, but even were half of that, it's something that should never have happened. My mother survived when she just walked out of the ghetto and took off her yellow star with her work when she was with her work detail and walked off to the home of the two Natashas whom she knew. She then pretended to be a French widow because she had studied piano with Nadia Boulanger actually in Paris and spoke fluent French. And she was able to pass a French woman. Husband was killed in the war. And she also had to go from place to place like I did because things became dangerous after being in the same place for some time. So she survived the war. And she came to actually visit me once at Lidas and brought me a doll she made from scraps of wool that she had. And I treasured that wool doll until it actually disintegrated in my teenage years. That was the only toy I actually had throughout the war. My father had a German detail boss, Fritz Zimmermann, who couldn't believe the Germans were doing. And so he took my father out of the ghetto on his truck to Liberty. My father had been a lawyer and a graduate of the military academy. So he had a revolver. So he went into the Vilnius ghetto and then into the woods to join the partisans who were the fighters. And he survived also. So the miracle of reuniting with them was amazing to me. And I actually had three mothers. I mean, I had Bronya Budrekaita, who's the illegal daughter I was supposed to be. I called Lida my rescue mother, and now I had my real mother back. So a little confusing for some at that age. On the right, I am now at the end of the map in Austria, not at the end, but almost at the end of the map in Austria, at the displaced camp in Graz. Graz was divided, Austria was divided at that time, and I was in the English sector. And here I was some English soldiers fooling around, and you'd see the name of the displaced persons camp on the door. My mother is in the middle of that picture on the left bottom with the accordion. She gave up the piano, obviously, and now she still made music with the accordion. But those are very precious photos because it's amazing that I have so many that survived. Next, please. And I'm in Italy. The first stable place I was in a long time. On the upper left, I am in Lake Como with my father enjoying a Sunday outing. But when I arrived in Italy, we had nothing. We had no money, no place to stay, no food. And in Milan, where we were, we slept on the cement floors of the Jewish community building. And my parents were very lucky and fortunate that I was taken to this children's home in Solvino. It was Scesopoli, and it was an exceptional place where about 800 or so children from age 5 to 16 or so were pulled together from different countries, different ages, different backgrounds, mostly orphans, and were given a home where they could learn the language of the Bible, they could have a meal, they could have an education. And on the bottom left, you have how we all got together in the morning to have a head count, I suppose. And on the upper right, I am in a dance group there in the middle, we're circled, which is kind of normal almost. It was an amazing place, and there was an organization that is now in existence in Israel that has made a group out of the people, the children who then went to Israel because they twined with a kibbutz. And I'm now part of this organization since I discovered them 2 years ago. Last year, there was supposedly a reunion to celebrate that the home that was formerly a Nazi place for relaxation and gymnastics and so forth, with a pool and marble floors and so forth, and had become this rescue place for Jewish orphans, became a museum. But Solvino is close to Milan, and most of you know where COVID started to be worldwide, and we had to cancel our trip. In the middle there, I'm still with flowers in Solvino, and on the upper color photo, you see the Teatro della Scala, which is one of the world-renowned theaters. And I was accepted in their ballet school there, where I studied. I'm probably the first foreigner that was accepted there. But I didn't last. I wanted an education. It was like 7 days a week practically of ballet. So next. Okay, we're on the way to America. Here I am on the right with my SS independence name on there. And the ship was still circling the Hawaiian Islands just years ago. On the left, you see all the passport photos that we had coming over. I had my 16th birthday on the ship coming over. And that was an interesting experience. My parents were very strict, and I had to be back at 10 o'clock when the party was still going in my honor from the captain. So next, please. And then my life started normalizing. I went to Newton High School, and I don't have any photos from there. But afterwards, I went to Barnard at Columbia. In Columbia, you see me in the color photograph in the middle on the Columbia statue that is so famous. And on the left, I'm in a show, a Barnard show, where I was a football player, chemistry professor, and torch singer. And then on the right, you see my whole family when they all together, when I was, when my children were not in their 50s. I am the blonde then, and my mother is looking up at me, and my father is on the right. My firstborn is on top of my brother's shoulder, and my secondborn is on top of my shoulders. Actually, they were born a year apart in a day, so not that first and second. And it's wonderful to be with a family. And you can see that continuum on the photo on the left where I'm with my grandchildren. So you can see that Hitler really lost. We are here to stay. The picture in the middle is one of my birthday parties where we're all together, and I'm in the middle, and my nephew is on the left, my granddaughter next to him, my grandson and daughter-in-law together, the redheads, and my sister-in-law, my other son, my nephew, my brother, and my some the tallest one in the middle. So a happy family again, but the scars are there. Next, please. And I did believe my legacy is really my life and gratitude. What can I say? On the upper left, I am speaking at the March of Remembrance in Houston with the National Guard behind me. And that is one of my ways to thank not only my rescuers, but also the fact that there's so much hope that we can give to each other because I'm alive. When 1.5 million other children died during the Holocaust, and 6 million Jews did as well, although that figure is being contested because when I was at Wannsee, there was actually a paper I saw that in 30 countries, there were 11 million Jews and not that many survived. On the left middle, I am with Bingham, Will Bingham, Kim Bingham. He's the son of Hiram Bingham, who was one of the rescuers who saved over 2,500 Jews as a diplomat in France. And one of my acts of gratitude was to help with the petition to get a stamp going in his honor. Now, he went against United States rules, and it would be very ironic, but he did get the stamp. And here we are at the inauguration of the stamp on the left at the Rotunda in Washington. On the bottom left, I don't think I need an introduction. This is John Lewis. And I'm very proud of this picture because he's such a legend and he has contributed so much. And I want to say that he's in some ways to me as well. On the upper left, you see that new photo that I had before about that was taken at Leda's farm and was used by UNESCO in Paris. Here it is on a mural in Lithuania, in Kaunas, because Kaunas is now going to be one of the cultural cities in 2022 of Europe. And below you can barely see the programs that were distributed at UNESCO with me on the front page. So this is basically my legacy. Next. There are many more things, but I want to conclude my presentation by reading this to you so you can follow in the steps. First, they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. This Martin Newhall. And so I want to inspire you to speak out, to see what the world around you is turning against its own conscience almost. And I want to encourage you to look deep into your heart and see how you can withstand this tidal wave of hate, injustice, and lies. Antisemitism is raising its ugly head again, and I never thought it would be in my lifetime. I never thought that so many untruths would become part of misguided individuals' mantras and ways to demonize Israel and the Jews. And I hope that when you go back to your families, to your friends, you will take away from this presentation that it is possible to live otherwise, that it is possible to have a better world, to a vision that is not destruction, but construction. That in each one of you, there is a spark that can ignite the goodness in you and in others. As Mother Teresa said, if you don't think one drop could change the ocean, just think that the ocean would be lesser because that drop is not there. I paraphrase. So if you think you can't do enough because there's only one of you, well, think again. You do have the power, you do have the possibilities, and you need to do this for yourself, for your children, for your children's children, and for the future of the world. Thank you for listening, and I want to leave you with the last word that is shalom. It's probably the most spoken word in Israel. It means peace, peace like in the world, and peace in your heart. Shalom.
Thank you so much, Rosian, for sharing your story and for ending with that wonderful message. I love the way you end your presentation. We do have some great questions from the audience, if that's okay with you to answer a few. The first one being from Amanda, who's watching today. She says, I teach 6th grade in rural Texas. What is your message to kids about being an upstander in a world of disconnection and social media?
Well, they're the future. They're the ones who can do what I was hoping more people would do in my generation and so forth. They can discern the right from wrong. They can see that racism, indifference, and hatred has no place in the world where we're all created in God's image and equal. So what can they do? They can learn about the Holocaust so it doesn't repeat in any format, because there's so many genocides now that have repeated since the Holocaust, and they can find the goodness in themselves and try to bring it out in others. It's best I can do.
No, I think that's great. We have another question that just came in. Do you keep in touch, or did you keep in touch if they've since passed, with any of your rescuers?
Absolutely. We used to send them packages. They loved coffee from America. And my father, main rescuer, so she could have a living because she was a piano teacher. And I actually went back and visited them several times. I mean, how do you thank someone for saving a life? There's never enough, and there's never the right way, because there's always more. So that's another reason I live in gratitude. Yeah.
Another question. This one is from Jeff, who's watching. He said, you have a very touching story. Thank you so much for sharing. What can people do today to combat anti-Semitism?
That is a very loaded question, because I am not a politician, and I am not, I don't know the answers. I don't think the government seem to know the answers, because what has happened, it's almost like an avalanche of lies and tropes and vogues and all kinds of things that play into the latent anti-Semitism that may have never left, but now has an excuse because whatever Israel does is wrong, no matter whether it's right or wrong. And so now the equation between Israel and the Jews has become a political football that can excuse people from seeing the truth that through the life that one saves is as if you save the world. So, what does that mean? So when we need to discern the truth that is being obfuscated actually, and find that we need to protect each other from what is happening without dissension and speak with one voice and educate people that a life cannot be lost for wrong reasons. And anti-Semitism is first, but then come the others. First come the Jews, and then comes everybody else, like Hitler was planning to eliminate all the Poles. You know, said, who remembers the Armenians? You know, so Nostradamus said, as goes Jerusalem, so goes the world, and we can make it a better world if we go for the truth.
Thank you, Rosian. We have a couple more questions. So one going back to when you were a girl, as a young child, so when the Soviets invaded, when the Germans invaded and your family was put into the ghetto, did you have a sense of kind of how big this thing was or what was going on, or were you just kind of living day to day? Do you remember what that felt like as a child?
No, I had totally did not understand what was happening. I was 5, 6 years old when the conflict started. And all I know is we didn't have enough to eat. We were cold. We were frightened. I saw things around me I just couldn't understand. And I didn't know why I was being persecuted. I was trying to be a good girl, you know? So I didn't understand why being Jewish was bad. I didn't understand why I had to hide myself from myself and everybody else. It was a totally disengaging period from myself to be somebody else. And the fear and the trauma returned when I see the anti-Semitism again today.
This is a sort of a similar question, and I'm not sure if you'll remember or not, but do you remember what was going through your mind when your parents put you through that hole under the fence and you were taken in by your father's secretary? Do you remember what you felt at that time?
Oh, it was total, I'm looking for the right word for it, and I'm not sure I can find it, but I was crying real literally for hours. I just was totally miffed at what was going on. Did my parents not love me anymore? Why do I have to hide? Why do I have to go in the middle of the night under this horrible fence? Why do I have to run? You know, it's like the world changed, and it was changing probably every month for me there. But as a child, I think you have memories, and some memories you don't want to face. And some come back at very inappropriate moments. Each time I do a presentation, some of the others come back, and I appreciate these questions that put me in touch with myself. So thank you.
Well, and we appreciate you kind of going back in your mind to that time. I know it can't be easy to do. This was an interesting question. How did you recover so many photos from your childhood, the photos of your rescuers? How did all of that survive? Because we saw the rubble of, after the war.
That is one of the good parts. My parents when I was born, my grandmother and my mother's side of the family stayed to watch me be born. And then the next day left for Israel. And so I have a family in Israel. It started at kibbutz, was an officer of a political party. And they sent photographs to Israel all the way until the war broke out. And then some of the other photos I have, because they were taken by my rescuers, but only one or two when I was on the farm that you saw. But they're all in a collection now at the United States Holocaust Museum in Washington. There's a very vast collection, actually, because I have the music of my uncle who was killed by the Nazis, who was a composer, and that collection is there too. All his music is there. And I'm still not completely finished with all the things that I have to plow through. But yeah, that's one of the highlights, how I could have that collection.
Well, and it's, just amazing to see that progression in photos because, so often all of those were lost. So it's wonderful.
Yeah. I have a box still that go through.
Maybe next time we see you, you'll have some new photos to add. Huh?
Yeah.
Well, Rosian, I think we are at time. We were able to get through most of your questions. Again, I want to thank you for being so patient with us today with our change of plans for technology. Keeps us on our toes. Thank you all again watching who were patient with us as we got things going today. We hope you'll tune in for the rest of our Summer Survivor Speaker Series. Again, it'll be Tuesdays at 1 o'clock through August 10th, I believe it is. So we hope you'll join us. Rosian, lovely to see you as always. Thank you so much. And we'll see everyone next time. Have a great day.